Alright guys, so I figured for today's episode of the Orchid Chronicles, rather than do an entire walkthrough update such on anything that's going on, I would do a little bit of an evaluation on a species, or sometimes it'll be on a genus or something of that sort. We're going to do a specific species this time because of the fact that it's part of a very large, diverse genus, and their cultural needs can vary quite a bit. So today we're going to do Dendrobiun kingianum, the king cook's orchid. It is an Australian lithophyte that comes from the coast of Australia. It is a symposial orchid, meaning that the growth points spread outward, as opposed to a monopodial orchid that would just grow up and down. The orchid presents itself as a variable, hard-caned dendrobium, meaning it's not deciduous. It does not drop its leaves, unlike some dendrobium species. The leaves are a kind of deep green color. The canes vary in size from about 4 or 5 inches to up to a foot tall. My orchid's form is quite strange. The oldest growth is much shorter than the youngest growth, and it's kind of making a staircase effect. These plants naturally form very large colonies, and like all dendrobiums, they prefer to be in comically small pots. I'm allowing this plant to become really dense, which is why it's in a slightly oversized pot. As far as light for this orchid goes, because it's a dendrobium, it should get as much light as is humanly possible. This thing stays outside from mid-April to mid-November. Out in full-blaring sun, it does not get any protection whatsoever. Inside, I keep it near an LED light at all times because they really benefit from a lot of sunlight. They really benefit from long day length, and that's what I give this plant. Watering is a little bit of a tricky part for people because this is an orchid that needs a lot of airflow to the roots. It needs to dry between waterings. However, they do like moist conditions. They like humidity. They, live in areas that rain constantly. When the plant is outside, I might be watering it daily just because of how quickly the soil dries. I've spoken in previous episodes about, watching the soil, and if you're in a really sunny area, if you're in a really dry area, really hot, you're going to use up the water in your pot much quicker than if it's cooler or more shaded. This plant should be having a lot of light hitting it. And this plant should be thoroughly watered, especially when it's in active growth. They do have a little bit of a dormancy period, and we're going to get to that when I talk about inducing blooms. Temperatures are a fun thing with this plant. They can tolerate light frosts, and they also can tolerate, heat waves. They can stay outside. They will survive temperatures in the upper 20s for brief periods of time. They will thrive in midsummer heats. Room temperature is fine to them as well. Very easygoing orchid species. Media, because it's lithophytic, you want to use, lithophytic means it grows in rocks, you want to use mostly the clay ball or gravel material, very large particles. You can use some bark that does help retain a little bit of moisture to keep the humidity around the plant itself high. I usually put a little bit more of the clay in this plant's media than I would for other plants that are epiphytic, where I try to balance the clay in the bark. This one gets a little bit more of the clay just because it is naturally lithophytic. I fertilize it quite a bit because it does grow vigorously, it does require a good amount of food, and because it doesn't have any organic material held in its media because it's a lithophyte, you do want to make sure it's getting plenty of nutrients. As far as pests and problems go, they don't really seem susceptible to diseases from what I've heard about them. I will sometimes get, and you can see the damage on the leaves of this plant, slugs and snails will chew on the very young growth. You can use snail repellent. I've heard that copper tape around the base of the pot will help to repel mollusks. I should try that. I had a lot of orchids munched on by mollusks this summer when I kept them outside. That's just the price you pay. I haven't had too many scale or mealybug issues with this plant, although I think there's a scale on the plant right now. Actually, it's better to see the plant than me. And they seem to be very easygoing plants. I've had problems with bud blast with this plant. You can see right now this plant has what I believe to be a flower spike. However, I don't really know. It looks like it's getting the glooms around the nodes that would indicate it's a flower spike. Like this is obviously a new cane that's formed, and I don't really know what that's going to become. The plant likes to put out kekis. Some of these grayish buds along the sides of the canes can swell and turn into kekis, and a keki, again, is just this baby plant growing up the side. This plant seems to really like putting out a few kekis a year, particularly in older growth, as opposed to sending up a new piece of the cane from the center. The flower spikes are always coming from the center, and if I look at some of the leaf junctions, some little purple pointy buds are expanding out, although last year some of those died and some of those turned into just more parts to the cane. As you can see with this cane here, you have 2 leaves there, and then it grew a little bit more. It does just form this big clump of cane plant material. Very interesting plant, very easy plant to grow. Getting them to bloom can be a little bit tricky. There are some people who stick to give it a dormant period seasonality to help it bloom. I've also heard that it inevitably blooms eventually no matter what you do. So if you aren't really in the mood to try and induce it to bloom, you may eventually get it to bloom. Again, the plant can be propagated mostly by dividing in kekis. Getting it to bloom by forcing it would generally include allowing it to cool off for several weeks, and allowing it to be dry for several weeks. Now, I did this last year too. However, I think last year I kept it dry for too long because the buds between the leaves eventually browned and died. It was a few months that I didn't water it for. This year I just let it go about 5 weeks dry rather than several months, and it seems to have fared better. You're not really going to stifle the plant growth, you're just going to cause bud blast and not get flowers. But the goal would be to keep it at temperatures in the low 40s, especially at night. Some other dendrobiums you can fridge at night, and you could do this, you could fridge this guy at night so that you can get those buds to kind of be induced to set. A little bit cool, a little bit dry. That apparently helps the plant. People do all sorts of things with this species. It's a very versatile, very appealing species. When it does bloom, apparently it has... I've seen them bloom, but I haven't gotten mine to bloom yet. Hopefully soon. The flowers are just mini dendrobium flowers that occur in these sprays, and a cluster of these plants can have dozens of spikes with, almost 100 flowers. Sometimes they're all open at once, sometimes they open slowly over the course of a few weeks. Really cool plant to deal with, very easy to obtain. So yeah, Dendrobium kingianum, really nice, easy orchid, probably my favorite of the Dendrobium.